Welcome back.
To the Tiny Bookcase. I'm Ben.
And I am Nico. What you're about to hear is an interview.
A damn good one, too. Prepare to learn.
If you enjoy hearing this guest talk, be sure to check out last week's episode where you can hear their story.
Ours, too, if you're so inclined.
So, without further ado,
on with the show. But we've got some questions for you, David, if you're up for it.
Okay, let's do it.
So, Nico, would you like to open us up?
Sure. What is the first book you remember reading?
I know I would have read others before, like Roald Dahl's and so on, but the first book I remember, holding in my hands and reading end to end would be Redwall by Brian Jacks.
Oh, what? Oh, that's a great answer. Sorry, you just hit me right in the childhood then. So that's.
So yeah, like I say, I do remember having others and reading others, but that's the first one I really remember. Like, this is a book and this is doing something.
Yeah. I think that's the case for a lot of people. Everyone has those vague. I say it every time, that the Biff Kipper and Chip, those kind of books, and your Roald Dahls and your fairy tales, but there's definitely an awakening book for everyone. So yours sits comfortably on Redwall. Do you revisit it?
I have them. My daughter is 7, and I tried to read it to her, but she wasn't having it. So I'll try again in a year, and then another year.
Keep trying to push it. Do you do other stuff like with like The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings? Do you try and get those in?
I relatively recently reread them for the first time, so I've only read each of them once, but young, and it is amazing how much I loved rereading Lord of the Rings. I got so much more from it now than I read. I was very young when I read it, possibly too young, and I remember it being a bit tough to read and slow, but it was nothing like that when I rereading it as an adult.
Yeah. I totally agree. I remember really clearly reading them and then bouncing the fuck off the Silmarillion when I was a kid.
I borrowed that from the school library and did not finish it. And I'm not tempted to go back either, but maybe I don't know what.
I would recommend going back now. I really would. It's as long as you're ready for it to be a history, not a story.
I think I tried The Children of Huron as well and didn't quite get into that. But then again, I would have been young.
Yeah,
that one's less good.
On the Redwall thing, I think that for me, you might agree. Maybe it's the same for you. That might have been where my love of the lower end of fantasy came from. Reading Redwall as a kid, and the bit where the badger, like, either like drowns an otter or something, or drowns a weasel, or cuts a weasel in half with a greatsword. I can't remember exactly what it is, but there's like a stunning like final duel at the end of that book, which is really quite brutal. And I seem to recall being blown away by it when I read that as a kid.
I think it was the adventure and the battles. I mean, I guess it probably set me up for everything I do now, writing adventure stories and battle stories.
Yeah, that makes sense. How did you end up becoming involved with the Black Library?
So they periodically do open submission windows, and I guess this would have been 2011, I think, a long time ago now, when I submitted a story. I'd started to think about it. I'm not one of those people who sort of have been writing stories forever and knew since I was 4 that I wanted to write and all the rest of it. It's just something that occurred to me during my PhD that I have this idea and I want to write it. And I tried it. I sort of wrote a bit of this and I did a writing course, an online writing course. And while I was doing that, I saw this submission window. I think there was maybe like a week left on it. I thought, I can't write a story in a week. I'll leave it. No, I'm like, no, I won't leave it. I'll do it. And it's a good thing I didn't leave it because they didn't have another window for years after that. That was the last one for a while.
Crikey, okay.
But luckily, I wrote the story and I got in, and then I wrote another and another, and eventually left the job and just write now.
Exciting times. So you must have written loads of for them in that time.
Oh, quite a lot. Got it written down somewhere how many books I've written, but
So many that you've actually lost count, which is amazing.
it was easier when it was just Black Library I wrote for. I could always remember how many books I'd written, but now it complicates things. Somewhere around 20, I think, about 20 novels, plus
Crikey.
novellas and short stories.
Yeah, it's amazing.
So it's well, specifically one of your books has come up on it was in the very first episode of the podcast, actually. It was Slayer, the last in the Gotrek and Felix series. You were involved in the ending of one of the kind of longest running Black Library arcs, and then when Age of Sigmar's rolled around, especially with Hamilcar, you've been involved in like doing a lot of the world building now. Like, how much scope and freedom and creativity do you get to put into it now compared to the old world?
I think Age of Sigmar is sort of bigger and with less constraints on it by design. But sort of by the same token, there are still rules to follow, and so I guess in sort of setting wise and character wise, there's probably more that we can do. But obviously, everything has to be thematically recognizable as being part of that world.
Yeah. Like, eat this, motherfucker, doesn't fit into any of the Warhammer books, does it? Although I would like to see it in there, I think.
They seem to be getting a bit more swearing in 40k these days. I don't know if that's just something that's creeping in.
The Space Marines are learning how to swear, Ben. No one is safe.
Just kick a door in and call someone a motherfucker before you chainsawed them in half. It's just.
I'll just shout, fuck, as you unload your vehicle.
It's the Humies, sir. They've learned bad words.
Orcs trying to cancel Space Marines. Oh, crikey. Wow, fucking great thing. How did you sorry, not to continue on with the Warhammer and Black Library thing, but how did you find or approach your writing of Gotrek and Felix?
That's one of the first things I did. So the story I submitted ended up as a Gotrek story. It didn't start as a Gotrek story. I think they decided they just liked the writing, but hey, could you rework that to be a story with Gotrek in? So I've been doing him, you could say, from the very beginning.
Was that City of Damned?
No, that was the Tillion's Talisman, a short story set in the Felix anthology. And then I wrote the novel Head Taker, which was my first novel. And then I did a Gotrek and Felix audio called Curse of the Ever Living. And then I wrote City of the Damned, which was like an out of timeline Gotrek and Felix novel.
Yeah.
And then Kinslayer and Slayer, the two that concluded their storyline. As you say, the super long running, like 20-year running storyline, which was very nerve wracking. Because, obviously, like I say, it's the end, and if I mess it up, then it's messed up forever, and I'll have ruined it for everyone.
Was it something? Did you really quite strongly get on with writing Gertrude now? Because it sounds like you've had a lot of success doing it. So was this a character that you were keen to write, or was it something that was the sort of the will of the Black Library, so to speak?
I was asked to do it, and I also couldn't say no. I might have been tempted to say no. I can't remember now, just because it's too scary. But no, I didn't say no, of course. And so I went back, of course, and read all the Bill King books, and I think even at that point, I probably hadn't actually read the Nathan Long books and on. So if anyone's listening who doesn't know, I think Bill King wrote the first 6 or 7 books, and then there's another 4 or 5 after that, written by a different author. So I think I'd only read the ones that I read when I was younger, and I never actually read on. So obviously now I'm finishing the story, I've got to read them all. And this time I took lots of notes and so on. And I think what was really great about the Bill King books, especially for me, was that he'd never really explained anything about everyone's backstory. I mean, he'd said a lot and hinted at a lot, but nothing was ever really set in stone. And that was an absolute godsend and a boon to
Yeah.
me, because it meant I had all these little hooks and I could do more or less anything and explain it in almost any way I liked. So like what Gotrek's original sin was, and what his relationship with Snorri was. All these things had been hinted at, so I could always point back at something and say, "Oh, I got it from that." But it was so wonderfully vaguely stated that I could have probably come up with tens of
Yeah.
options for how to close these stories off.
Amazing.
I will fangirl for a moment just to say you did good. The boy done good. It was
Brilliant.
I thoroughly enjoyed the ending and cited it as the last time I'd cried reading a book in the first episode of this podcast.
I
So
particularly enjoyed the first of them, actually, Kinslayer, because I knew I didn't know anything about the Age of Sigmar. I didn't know what was going to happen afterwards, but I did know that like the world was going to end. And so, sort of, when Felix is like traveling north through the Empire, it was sort of like my little farewell tour of all the provinces.
Oh,
So that was quite emotional for me. Like, oh,
yeah.
now we're leaving Ostermark now. Bye, Ostermark.
oh wow.
I could talk about this all day. We should move on.
Let's do. So, bit of a. Well, we'll go here. What's your favourite story? So it can be any book or comic book or film or anything like that. Like
Fable, anything. Yeah.
it's anything that is a story, something that resonates with you and that you sort of carry with you in your head.
See, I would always say Lord of the Rings, but we've talked about Lord of the Rings. So it feels like kind of speaking.
I mean, you can totally answer Lord of the Rings if you'd like to. That's it's a very wise choice. I think it's such a rich novel.
I mean,
Series.
yes. I mean, I even having not read it in sort of 15, 20 years, it's still sort of affected and sort of influenced what I write, simply because I think it influences what everyone else has written.
Yeah.
Changes the language with which people speak about fantasy, so you have to know about it and be well versed in it, perhaps, to navigate that.
If there's any others, I can think of one more. So you probably know it. Gates of Fire by Stephen Pressfield. Do you know it?
I actually don't. Do you know
It's,
this?
it's a historical fiction novel about the Battle of Thermopylae.
Ooh, I do
And
love a historical fiction novel.
it is excellent. I think I was reading it just before writing my first novel, and I could just feel sort of the way he did things in particular battles, sort of creeping into the way I was doing them. And for a while, I always read a Stephen Pressfield novel after that. Whenever I was writing a novel, I'd read it. I'd read another Stephen Pressfield, but then I ran out of Stephen Pressfields.
You got to go back. Did you have to start on Con or Bernard Cornwell or people like that?
A lot of people do talk about Cornwell. Actually, I think maybe John French might have mentioned to me that he was one of his favorites. And I did. I read The Fort recently, one of his about the American Civil War.
Mm.
And yeah, I love the way he sort of ends a chapter. Seems like a weird thing to say, but there's nothing sort of particularly fancy about the way he writes. He just writes really, really well.
He's
And
managed to nail how to craft a page turner, hasn't he?
mm,
In a historical fantasy. Not fantasy, historical fiction genre.
what if he has stepped outside of historical fiction? Probably not.
I've read his Arthurian Myth trilogy that he wrote
Right.
quite a long time ago, but that's basically him grounding it in history. Like they are Briton, warlords fighting against Saxon invaders. They're not.
It didn't happen, but if it were to happen, this is how it would have happened.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But you're right. The way that he ends chapters, I think the last time I read one, I noticed that he ends every single chapter, and they're quite short chapters, with a simple sentence, very short sentence.
Yes, it was always something like, and then the Americans came, or
Yeah,
the British were coming. Something, I say it, nothing, there's no rocket science in there at all.
no,
But
not
it's
at all.
not poetic in any way. It's just really concise, really punchy, and it just makes you want to, turn that page and not stop at the end of that chapter, keep going. And yeah, I think you can learn a lot from reading Cornwell.
Mm.
And
I like
Conor, you mentioned as well, I've got his Genghis Khan novels, and they're fantastic.
Yes, I've read those as well. Had a really good time reading those. The descriptions that these guys go into with from their research always really gets me going. I've done it actually a few times on this podcast. I know that Nico has started asking me, "Is this a real thing?" after I've read something out, because I think I have been influenced by people like Cornwell and Eagledon to
Someone told me
draw.
recently that Conor Eagledon had branched into fantasy, and I was like, what? He has? I had no idea.
Exciting.
Bye. But
There's
I do so much
the
reading reading for the settings I work in, that my reading for pleasure is reduced so much these days. I try to alternate, but it doesn't always work out that way. I'll read a Black Library novel, then I'll read something for my own satisfaction, then I'll read another Black Library.
I like the idea of pairing when you're writing a book with wanting to reading something that would inspire you in the right way. I think that's a cool technique. It allows you to digest something you want to be reading, perhaps.
Yeah, I think it absolutely works, because I think I was writing my first Aconite novel set in the Descent universe, Shield of Deccan, when I was doing my reread of Lord of the Rings, and I absolutely felt that sort of description of nature and landscapes that Tolkien does sort of coming in to what I was doing.
So you read alongside, but what are the other major parts of your process for your writing? Like, do you have one path you follow, or how do you go about it?
So I think one thing that even now, after all the years I've been doing it, I still don't quite I'm not reconciled with, is that my first draft is never particularly great. And in particular, the first couple of chapters I'll probably never be happy with, and I'll keep going back and tweaking them or rewriting them entirely and thinking, oh, I've lost it. I can't write anymore. It's rubbish. But then you've got to remind yourself that, you've done 10, 15 books, and it's always okay at the end,
Yeah.
And so what I tend to do is I'll write like a quarter of the book, and then I'll read it and I'll rewrite it. And then I'll get to the half, and then I'll do it all again. And then by that point, I'm pretty happy now. The tone is right, the characters are there, so the rest kind of almost writes itself, in a sense. I don't have to keep on doing all that rewriting. But
I was going to say, I started getting really worried for you then.
like,
I get to 90% and I start over. Oh no!
I mean, I don't know how it was for you guys, but I probably wrote this story I read today about 3 or 4 times.
3 or 4 times.
I don't know if you shoot them out first time.
Sometimes yeah, very rarely is it right the first time. I think this one had 2 or 3 edits from me. I know Nico recently read one that just came out fully formed, pretty much.
Yes.
That was very powerful.
That is a rarity.
Yeah, but I think editing's always a good thing, isn't it?
If nothing else, it's making sure that, like you say, when you get to the halfway point and you know who the characters are, it's when you've written the end, going back and making sure it's the same people at the beginning. That kind of thing. It's making sure your through lines there, getting clarity in your work. Otherwise, yeah, you've just written a mess.
I find that my first draft tends to be quite plain and blank. I don't quite get the voice of the narrator, and the flourishes don't seem to come in until I give it the second pass. It's always, my first draft is, I'm here and I need to get there, and it's very empty until I give it a couple more drafts.
That's a method that makes a lot of sense to me. Sketching it in and then colouring it later.
Yeah,
I think.
I don't want to do it that way. I just
Just the natural way.
the way it seems to happen for me.
Do you have a sort of magic number in mind that's the finished book? So do you have like a word goal in mind when you're writing that first draft, or?
Yeah, so I'm always sort of commissioned to a word count. So Black Library books, I think they were about 100,000. I think now they're about 90,000. And the ones I do for Aconite are a bit shorter than that. I think I'm commissioned to about 88,000. I think they always mind if it's a bit over. But I think over time I have learnt better how much story is needed. I think doing audios in particular, which are basically scripts, for which, of course, there is more of a limit because there's only so much you can fit on a disc.
Yeah.
I think I learned a lot from doing those of how much story is superfluous and what you really need. And I have noticed that since I've written those, I'm sort of dropping 10,000 words off the count of my novels, so it's gone from 110,000 to 100,000 or whatever.
That's really interesting.
Shorter.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's these skills you pick up doing different things.
Important to turn your hand to them. I think the sort of veteran skilled quality of your writing, it really came through in that story that you read out earlier. It just I could have read an entire novel in that voice. So it was really good. So that's your process. We talked about some stories that you like and stuff. Can you think of a book that didn't work for you at all, or like employed a style or a particular technique that didn't work for you, and that you've then gone on to make sure that you avoid in your own work?
It's a hard one. I'm trying to think of a novel I haven't finished or didn't like for some reason. I know that there must be others, but for some reason, the only one I can think of is one that sometimes my girlfriend gets, like their airport paperbacks and leave
Yeah.
one, and I'll read them from time to time. And there was one about a lawyer. I can't remember, but I didn't get far through it because it had those terrible descriptions of women that you see sometimes on Twitter.
Yeah.
People posted up. Yeah, how do you know it's a man writing a woman sort of?
Oh yes.
And so I think I got about 2 or 3 pages in, and I was like, "How did my girlfriend read this?"
Is it the kind of thing where they only get like 3 paragraphs in before they're describing their own breasts? That's like a classic one in fantasy, isn't it? It's sort of like she's walking along, feeling the way that her nipples rubbed against the inside of her silken gown. It's like that's not what people think.
Breasts that are somehow both perky and pendulous. That's often the case, isn't it?
All I remember was there was a line that I'm probably saying it a bit wrong, so I don't want to do a disservice to the author, who I can't remember who it is. But I think the basic gist of it was that she looked like Amy Adams but didn't realise it, or something.
And she was, in fact, Amy Adams in a wig.
I decided book closed.
Yeah.
Charity shop.
My favourite bits of those books are deciding whether the main character is ruggedly handsome and intelligent, or intelligent and ruggedly handsome.
Oh yeah,
because those are the 2 archetypes of lead. But he was a lawyer, so he was probably intelligent and ruggedly handsome.
I know. Now I feel like I'm gonna get this wrong, but Gemmell wrote. I'm fairly sure it was Gemmell wrote a series of books with a main character called Sparhawk.
Sparrowhawk, isn't it?
Is it Sparrowhawk?
It could be Sparrow.
It's
Anyway,
something like
I
that.
know.
The and they're very good. They're fun books. They're very much in the Lord of the Rings vein and all the rest of it. But I could not get over the fact that his main description of his main character was the fact that he had a broken nose. But don't worry, he was still handsome. Like every time people were talking about him, you've got to avoid it.
His wonky nose, but in a good way.
But in a good way, yeah. You cast in just the right light, he's still handsome.
I suppose I could go for Conan as well. I mean, I went through a thing of Like, there's all these classical novels that I've not read in my own genre. Right? I really should. So I was reading like Fafhrd and the Mauser and Conan, and some of the Conan ones were really good stories, and then some others were like really not.
Some of them are absolutely hilarious as well. They tend to all go along the line of someone saying, "Ah, but don't you see, Conan? Now I have trapped you." And Conan will have a pithy response along the lines of, "You fool, don't you know I'm Conan?" before immediately cutting them in half. And there's so many ways they've told that story. It's brilliant.
It made me think of, I mean, the writers of it was in the final Baldur's Gate installment, and I think you come across this other party of adventurers, and one of them is a barbarian, and I think they've clearly been, inspired by Conan because the little dialogue with them is like, and I can cast the magic missile, and you are from this place, untouched by the trappings of civilization.
Ugh. Yeah.
Oh, good old King Conan, eh? Well, go on. We've talked to you about books for a bit. I'm going to give you a reprieve by asking a definitely weird question. So, David, what's your secret talent that few people know about? And I'd like to add, it can definitely be a rubbish talent.
My rubbish talent. I can touch any part of my back.
Wait, clarification. With what?
I can apply sun cream to my own back quite easily. And
Crikey.
I always thought that other people needing other people to do their backs for them was sort of like tripping on a banana skin, but that's not what happens. Until like I freaked out my yoga teacher. She was like, "What? You
So is it
can't bend like that."
Yeah.
loose shoulders, double jointed elbows? What have we got going on? Are we just some sort of gangly limbed or orangutan man? What's going on here? David, fill me in.
It's useless, and yet at the same time, pretty cool skill.
Yeah, pretty cool. I do like the idea that where Nico's mind initially went was that you were doing it somehow with your feet. That would have been.
Yeah, feet. That's definitely what I was thinking.
I was thinking like some kind of tool, like a litter grabber.
Yeah.
Still wrong.
Okay, well, I think we may have guessed what Nico thought it was for a second. Oh, that's great.
Tongue.
Yeah. So I think you've also done some work for various like games companies as well, not just Warhammer, but I know your Twitter bio lists you as having done some stuff with Fantasy Flight Games and Asmodee. What do you do for them?
So Fantasy Flight owns the Descent game world, which I've written one novel for so far.
Yeah. Was it any different to working for a sort of a bigger company like Games Workshop? I say bigger.
It was perhaps a little more relaxed, I think, because there's not so much to contradict. There's not this huge body of this massive corpus of novels and rule books to get stuff wrong against.
There's a lot. And
Yeah.
a lot of people who know it extremely well.
Yeah, my understanding is they get rather angry if you get it wrong as well.
I think there was a bit more freedom to invent stuff.
Yeah.
And then they're also a bit more relaxed about what we made. So the process of pitching idea to then starting writing was definitely shorter and less painful than it can be sometimes with Black Library. At the same time, it was a bit trickier. The tone of those books was a bit different, so they're a bit less violent. They're a bit happier. They're not grim dark.
Yeah.
So that was a bit of an adjustment to make.
Okay.
And also, it is the little things, the things that a reader won't notice, like having to instead of a single apostrophe mark for speech, having the double speech marks, and writing in American English, little things like that take me about half a book to catch up to.
Yeah.
Go through at the end and take all the U's out.
Just cull all the U's with a scythe.
Actually, the spellings you sort of get that if you're heading on. It's the sayings
Yeah.
that sometimes you don't even realise they're British sayings.
I guess possibly where the usefulness of an editor comes in to its fore. Have you ever encountered adversity when you've been pursuing your career as a writer? I know you said you weren't initially trying to do that, but then obviously you now have a very very good career as a writer. Has anything ever sort of gone wrong that you've had to go sort of overcome to continue?
I think I've been very fortunate in that respect that I've not, apart from that one time that I blindly pitched and got in. I've either had a job at the time if I'm doing writing and haven't had the time, or writing has been my whole job and I can't speculatively do stuff because I need to earn the money.
Yeah.
So I've not really sort of felt that rejection that's supposed to be the day to day, the background hum of life at least as a budding professional writer. So yeah, I have been turned down for the odd thing along the way. Like recently, I did try out, like, do a writing sample for a computer game project, which I didn't get in. But I think if you have other writing on, it doesn't really sting because it's just one of those things.
Yeah.
I guess probably the worst thing, like one of my early books was so clearly bad that I pretty much had to write the entire thing in edits. I won't say which one, but it was one of my earlier ones, and so that I was like, oh, I'll never work for these people again. They'll never want me. They'll never want me back. But I think they are quite understanding. I don't know how it is at other companies. I'm sure people are people everywhere, but I think they understand that everyone can have a bad day at the office.
Yeah.
And we'll produce rubbish every so often. And this was my day. This was my time. But I think I was lucky that it came to me then when I wasn't writing full time, because I think if I had to do something like that now, it would break me because I'm just
Yeah.
so busy. But when I finish one thing, I'll be writing the next thing. If I then had to write a whole book again, I'd probably I'd walk into the night and not come back.
Well, I hope that never happens for you.
On that long walk into the night, we're going to let you take one genre of fiction with you, and all others will be left behind forever. What genre do you take?
It's a tough call between fantasy, science fiction, possibly even historical fiction. I guess I'd have to take fantasy in it because that's what I mostly do.
Is it what you mostly enjoy to read as well?
I do like science fiction. I do. I recently, the most recent book I read just for fun was Adrian Tchaikovsky's Shards of Earth, which I thought was fantastic.
Brilliant.
Have you read that one or any of his?
No, actually, my uncle repeatedly pushes me in that direction, and I have yet to succumb. But I will do it eventually, I think.
I read his first series, which is a fantasy, Shadows of the Apt, and I always feel really bad for not liking it because everyone loves it. But I only read the first book. I think it's 7 or 8 in it, but it doesn't do it for me. But it was his first book, so maybe he was like still, learning what to do.
Yeah.
But I got this one because it was, I think, the only one of his that my local library had. I get a lot of my books from the library these days.
Oh, that's interesting.
And
Cool.
so that's the one I got, and it was so good. It was really good. It was like the proper space opera. I think the science is good, but it wears it quite lightly. It doesn't go, into it. It's not what the story's about, but at the same time, it's believable. And he's clearly like done his work and knows what it is, and he's sort of built this fantastic world with these alien peoples, and they make sense and they interact, and
Sounds great.
yeah, it's great. It's a bit like we had with Bernard Cornwell. There's nothing, there's no magic in these words. They're just the right words with a great story.
Yeah, just keep it going.
All it
sounds
takes,
fantastic. Yeah.
In one respect, that's the worst kind of book to read as a writer because, like, there is nothing mystical. Why can't I do it?
Why can't I do it? Is it worse than reading something that's ostensibly the perfect version of what you're trying to do, though? Because there's been a couple of times when I've been reading something whilst I've got a short story on the go or something like that, and I read somebody else do it way better than I'm doing it, at least at the moment, and just it's very difficult to get back to writing after reading something that good. Whereas I guess if there's this element of like demystification to the writing process, like we were saying with Cornwall, then at least you could have a go at it when you sit back down at your keyboard.
I think the way you go on that probably depends on where your mind is. I think if you're minded to see the negative side of it, then you will, and vice versa.
That's very wise. Yeah, I think you're probably right there.
Yeah, I mean, so there are people, like I said, with the story that you read for us. I think there are people who just do not write the way I could ever write, and I really know it's quite safe. I also read my first Neil Gaiman book recently, and that's one of those. He has a very peculiar writing style, but a very great writing style. And I know I could never do anything like that, so I feel no badness about how fantastic it is.
Yeah.
But then someone like Tchaikovsky, who I think, it's kind of my style. It's sort of semi-humorous. It's I could do this, and yet at the same time, I could. You can trick yourself into thinking you could do this because it looks like you could, but there's work goes into it.
Yeah.
And he's done the hard work of actually creating a believable universe, which you don't get to see.
No. It's almost nice seeing the building blocks being put in place. Perhaps that's I like that. I like that answer. We all sort of have little touchstones that we use to reassure ourselves or make sure we're on the right path. But what's a quote you live by, a saying, or even a feeling, or even outlook?
I've got one. I remember when I was at university, I was always kind of struck by the Kennedy quote about the moon landings, and I used to have it on a poster. One of those people that we do these things not because they're easy, but because they're hard. And that did always resonate with me.
I think I can see that. I think that's it's almost I don't know if we talk about Pratchett a lot on this podcast, but it reminds me very strongly of like a Granny Weatherwax kind of saying that. It's the hard things that are good.
Yeah.
Gets you through those tough days. Then that.
That's how I think about it in that way, but it is something that I do remember from time to time.
What does it mean to you? Do you think?
I guess it means, things are hard, things are struggle. That's kind of okay. That's means you're doing something worthwhile.
Yes.
No reward without risk. I think that's it's a quite a good outlook to have, really, especially if you're in the creative sphere, as we're going to quite wankily call it in that moment. Good job, Nico. But I think if you're out there auditioning for things, or if you're writing, or if you're making music, or whatever you're doing, it's gonna be hard work. And if you think, oh well, I'll just write a song now and then and not have to do anything else, well, you're never really going to be all the way in. And once you are all the way in, it will be hard, but it will also be brilliant, because guess what? You're doing exactly the thing you want to do. So yeah, I think I get that one. I like it. I've never had anything to say about Kennedy before, but I'll take it.
The only thing that I associate with Kennedy in terms of quotes, apart from that one, which is a really good one, is the that one in Berlin where it's sort of, is it a bit of a misnomer that he was saying like
Ich bin ein Berliner.
I am a hamburger or something was.
So a Berliner is a type of donut.
Right.
So
Yeah, I've only heard this from an Eddie Isn't show, so I don't know if it's
Oh,
true.
really?
but he the story goes that he said to someone there, how do I say I am? And they said, it could be an ein. He said, all right. So he went out in front of all these people in Berlin, and he wanted to say, I am a person of Berlin. So he said, Ich bin ein Berliner. And then everyone there lost their shit because he just got up and said, I am a donut.
Right, I really hope that's true. I really hope that's.
I don't know if
right
it's one of those
interpretation.
apocryphal stories or not.
I think
Yeah.
the joke often then goes like, I wonder what he would have said in Hamburg, which is where the hamburger thing comes from.
Is that where I'm?
Yeah.
So it is an Eddie Izzard thing I'm getting this from. Oh, yeah. So hopefully it's not apocryphal, as you say, David, and that is true history right there. Excellent. Well, I think we need to tell people where they should start reading David Guymer. Where should they begin? Which book?
I think we could probably do worse than the Marvel one, which is ebook is just out today as we record.
Oh, brilliant!
It's called Dark Avengers: The Patriot List. I recommend that one because I just assume most people who listen to this, even if they don't know Warhammer that I work in, mostly are probably going to know who the Avengers are.
Never heard of them.
And it's new, so win-win.
That's really exciting that it's come out today. I have seen the cover and it's got a banging cover.
It's a beautiful cover.
Yeah, it's really.
I have had some great cover envy recently from some of the other Marvel titles coming out. The Ghost Rider one in particular looks quite exquisite. I don't know if you've seen that one.
I haven't, no, but
it's just psychedelic colours all over.
I mean, it's really easy to make Ghost Rider look brilliant because just as a design, so metal, so cool.
Definitely. Oh, what was the I know we've sort of plumbing into these a little bit, but what the process of working for Marvel, was that any different to the previous ones that we've spoken about?
So it was indirect, my sort of contact with Marvel. So the publisher's Aconite, and they have the license to book. So I never sort of interacted directly with anyone at Marvel, but I'd occasionally see like their comments in a Word document and be like, "Ooh, someone at Marvel has commented on my Word document."
Oh, that's wonderful.
So yeah, basically, I would pitch to my editor at Aconite, who would then pass that on to their contact at Marvel, who, if they needed to, would talk to whoever was involved in that particular comic line over there, and then like daisy chain its way back down to me. But it didn't feel like Chinese Whispers or like it could have done. It all seemed to work fine at my end.
Oh, that's brilliant. I tell you, it's so nice to hear just like things going well for somebody that's a professional writer. It's obviously we've had a lot of very successful, very talented people on, but so many people have absolutely horrible stories about something that happened that they had absolutely no control over and completely fucked them over for a little while. And it's really nice to hear that touch wood, hasn't happened.
Well, I guess pandemic lockdown time was pretty hard. Trying to keep writing with a young child locked at home with you. My girlfriend's a doctor, so she was working through it. So it's just me and the child. Correct. I basically I think stopped working for all of last year, and it was really quite tough to get back in.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad you are doing so. People should definitely check out the Patriot List then, because
that was my first post-lockdown book. It was quite cathartic, actually, in many ways.
To create something fully after the lockdown.
Go do it.
Yeah.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Also, I feel like a lot of what I was sort of feeling and suffering at the time came out in sort of characters like Norman Osborn and Venom and the Sentry. Osborn in particular, I felt a lot of his struggles, and it was quite nice to be able to write them out
Brilliant.
Oh god, yeah. But writing Sentry must have been super easy to get into, and you haven't been able to leave the house for ages.
Yeah, I was worried as soon as I said that you might not know who that was, because he's not exactly a household name.
Oh, Nico's Nico's something of a Marvel file, I would say. So I'm sure.
Well, Nico should definitely go and download the Patriot List, unless he wants to wait for the paperback, which is in November.
Joke's on you, I'll get both.
Oh, it's wonderful. So where can people find you online? So we know that they're going to go and read the Patriot List, but where should they follow you to get updates on your work?
So I mostly exist on Twitter. If you search my name, you'll probably find me, but my handle is Warlord Guymer. I also have an author page on Facebook and a Goodreads page where every so often someone leaves a question and I'll answer it, but not much goes on there.
Oh, that's lovely. Well, I'm sure people will check you out, as they definitely should. I've had a phenomenal time talking to you about the ins and outs of your career and your approach to writing. It's really left me with a smile on my face. So thank you very much.
Thank you. This has been a different kind of thing for me, actually. Normally, when I go on like podcasts, interviews, it's normally just talking about the book. It's quite different for me to talk about the actual process of writing. It's actually something I've done before.
Oh, really? Yeah, we really like doing it with people, especially after everyone reads a story out, which means that we've all sort of, I don't know. I know Nico was trying to avoid using wanky language earlier, but we've all sort of bared our soul a little bit.
Oh, there it is.
By reading a story out, and then you get to talk about the processes and all sorts. I find it really unlocks things, and it was really interesting to hear about your process. So thank you for sharing it with us. Thanks for joining us for this episode of The Tiny Bookcase.
Remember to subscribe, otherwise you're going to miss out on the future fun.
Also, tell a friend. If you like this episode, link them to it.
We'd be tremendously grateful. You can follow us on Twitter at BookcaseTiny, Facebook at The Tiny Bookcase, and Instagram at BookcaseTiny for updates. Speaking of supporting the podcast, well, magic can only take one so far. The Tiny Bookcase is supported by the generosity of its patrons. Those kind souls have really kept my belly full the last year. Let's cast a spell for them, shall we? For magnificent beardery, let's cast the Chinicus folliculale spell on Gary Laird. For rich ginger tones on the scalp, let us cast the Orangi Hedondo spell for Scott Byrne. And for general fabulousness, why not the Ooh La La, How's Your Mother spell on Matthew McLaren?
How do you come up with that shit, man?